Hi chap here, welcome to the workshop. Today I'd like to introduce you to a Lebel rifle. You're going to say, that's not a Lebel rifle, this is a Lebel rifle. Well, you're right, but that's also kind of Lebel rifle. Now this is what is sometimes mistakenly called a school battalion rifle. It is chambered in a 6mm Bosquette here, and I'm going to cover a bit of history, why these came about, features of the rifle, the particulars of the ammunition, and of course we'll take it shooting. So we're entering here into the realm of martial or military education of children, which was, is, and forever will remain, hopefully, a sensitive subject, and it is usually closely linked to politics. So we'll just stay clear of that. But in France, this was no exception, and such education essentially began in the Napoleonic era, with the inclusion of military-style exercises in physical education for secondary school boys. Sorry girls, you're excluded from all of this at the time. So yes, it was just purely physical education. There was no firearms or dummies or whatever. And then following the defeat of 1871, this training became more advanced for boys aged 16 and up. And this was largely due to the concept as a spirit of revenge after the defeat. Whether that was wholeheartedly engaged by the general population or just pushed by the political class is another discussion. But the fact remains that this was pushed, but even then it was still largely an ad hoc basis. There was no set syllabus or anything. It's just whatever you were capable of, even sometimes nothing. Things became more formalized from 1880, when then there was a formal law passed, which meant that all primary school boys, so that's age 16 to 13, had some rudimentary military education as well as just the physical training. And the aim was, of course, to model some patriotic citizen soldiers and prepare them for military service, which would follow usually soon after the end of compulsory education. The thought behind it was that if every young man goes into military service with a basic understanding of military maneuvers, rifle handling and shooting theory, this could then potentially reduce the training time and therefore reduce the costs of military service overall. Remember, this is a massive conscript army. So the rifles that were used for the school battalions fell into two categories. For pupils aged up to 13, you could essentially call them toy rifles. So they were wooden drill rifles with some kind of functioning bolt, a bit of wood or metal that moved, and a bayonet lug, so you could mount a little blunt bayonet. They, at the time, had to be in a rough, and I've stressed the rough, approximation of the Gras rifle, the service rifle at the time. And most of them were produced by local workshops, the local industry, blacksmiths, coachworks, whatever. And so they range from things that are very nicely finished and look quite close to things that are frankly just bits of wood nailed together. It depended on the available budget of the commune. Now, when it came to the older boys, so 14 and up, their target practice was actually planned, and this was then only for those that showed promise. So if you couldn't hit a barn door, you were going to be stuck with your toy rifle. But for those that could hit the barn door, they were given the Gras school rifle, the Gras scolaire, which is a slightly scaled down, but in terms of features, one-to-one copy of the standard infantry rifle then, and it fires an 11mm round ball cartridge. So it's a slightly shorter cartridge, and it's a reduced charge, and it has a round ball. But there's no bayonet lug on that, so you can't accidentally shoot someone when doing drill practice. So the battalions themselves had their own uniforms and their own flags, and they were also expected to take part in the major parades throughout the year. So in particular, the 14th of July. And the training was usually held on Sundays, and it was under the tutelage of a military instructor who was often just a school teacher due to having no people available from the barracks to come and teach. And these people usually were just given a book and they had no military experience due to their calling. Yeah, that you can imagine the quality of training that was being given out. Now, were these battalions viewed favourably by society? Well, not really. The Catholic Church in particular was strongly opposed because this Sunday training added to, or in the worst case scenario, even supplanted the traditional Sunday school, which they saw as reducing once again their influence on the young. And actually, surprisingly, the army too, although initially very enthusiastic, realized that the supposed advantages of the system were largely an illusion due to the generally poor quality of training that was being given. And also, the general population was tiring of the whole spirit of revenge thing that was so strongly pushed by the politicians. And really the idea of child soldiers was becoming increasingly difficult to justify. Added to this was the fact that all this had to be financed by the local councils or local communities. So you would get some wealthy communes that would have nice kit, probably even manage to hire ex-soldiers to train, and then you would have countryside communes that just didn't have the means and they would scratch something together. So all in all, the system became not really manageable, the quality was poor, the general population was against it, and these gradually disappear until about 1893. So if it was all abolished, what about this rifle? Well, that's because that wasn't the end of the story. Although the concept of a pseudo-military education in the broad sense was rejected, the advantages of being taught how to shoot, however, that persisted. And on the 27th of July 1893, there was a decree that all male pupils, obviously, aged 10 and above, would receive military shooting instruction at 12 meters. The rifle was to be a rifle chambered for 6mm Flaubert, or it could continue to be the Gras cadet rifle, or school rifle, in 11mm. And following this decree, various commissions were set up, of course, to approve a standard pattern or standard form of rifle that would be used, and also to establish a fixed instruction guide for teachers so that a minimum standard could be achieved, whether the teachers themselves have any shooting experience or not. With this guide, they should be able to bring the pupils up to a certain level. Now, the rifle that was recommended by the commission in charge was La Française, very patriotic name, and that was produced or proposed by the Union Nationale des Sociétés de Tir de France, which was then, at the time, we're in the 1890s, very aesthetically close to the proper Lebel rifle. Now, shooting training became so well established that the first championships were held in 1896. So this was a shooting championship between the school shooting associations. This was, again, organised by the Union Nationale des Sociétés de Tir de France, so the National Union of French Shooting Societies. And in fact, this became very, very popular. And the number of school shooting societies and championships then subsequently flourished and multiplied. And the government actively encouraged this, of course, and they provided all sorts of materials. There were medals and certificates, and they also encouraged this also post-school. So once your compulsory education had finished, you were encouraged to continue to visit these clubs so that you would continue shooting in this gap that bridged the end of school and the start of national service. As a consequence of this, there was a whole trade that sprang up alongside, as we do today, to provide range accessories, targets, ammunition, the medals, the certificates of merit, flags, you name it. And also the rifles, because although La Française was the rifle of choice, let's say, from the advertisements that you can see from the time, it's obvious that that was only one of the rifles that was authorized. And I think anything that must have gone within a set of criteria could be used, like this one here, which is proudly bearing the nice brass plaque of La Scolaire Préférée. So it's much better than La Française because it's the preferred one. And it's even got a nice little rack number. The golden age of these societies seems to have been between about 1905 and the outbreak of the Great War. And then they gradually sort of die out in the 1920s, although it must be said that quite a few of them evolved to become fully fledged shooting clubs, some of which still exist today. So some modern French shooting clubs can trace their history all the way back to these school shooting societies. So let's take a closer look at the rifle itself. As you can see from the silhouette, it is fairly faithful to its big brother. It is a single shot, of course, and the bolt is very, very simple. And the locking system is simply the root of the cocking handle as was standard in the black powder era and perfectly adequate for what it's intended to shoot. The sliding extractor is a moon-shaped extractor and it's pretty thick. If you put a cartridge in place, you'll find that it pretty much covers almost half of the cartridge length. A unique feature of this bolt is a neat telescopic feed tray which pops out of the bolt head, and this is very useful given the fiddly nature of the ammunition. Then again, it's supposed to be fed by small fingers and not fat adult fingers. The sights include a dovetail mounted barleycorn front sight and a fully adjustable rear sight. The minimum distance is 12 meters, which was what it was intended to be used at, and the distances beyond 100 seem to me to be very optimistic given the ammunition. The barrel is chambered for this 6mm Bosquette and it has 6-groove rifling. The bore is 5.7mm and the grooves are 5.78mm. So keep those dimensions in mind. So what exactly is 6mm Bosquette? Is it interchangeable with 6mm Flaubert or even too short? Well, the Flaubert is actually the granddaddy of all the 2.2s, and that is the basic short, very short rimfire cartridge, which was patented by Louis-Nicolas Auguste Flaubert in July of 1849. Something of interest to note when I was looking at this patent, there was a small drawing of the cartridge in the figures, and there is explicitly mentioned that there a small charge of powder behind the ball. So it's not what is today like the 6mm BB cap, which is just primer. There was still powder in there. So something that's disappeared over the years. So how does Bosquette differ from that? Well, for that we need to turn to the patent of July 1872, filed by André-Alexandre Bosquette, a Parisian gunsmith, which actually only concerns the bullet profile for Flaubert cartridges. Now, what is important here is that we have a stepped front face. So there is a shoulder, a sharp shoulder, before the nose of the bullet. And this was supposed to scrape, i.e. clean the barrel with each shot. So this sharp corner would then sweep all the crud ahead of it. This kind of cartridge could also have a double bottom, so there would be the brass drawn around the copper part of the case, and you could also find them in long and extra long versions. So that I could actually shoot this, I was able to find this small stash of genuine 6mm Bosquette made by Nouvelle Cartoucherie de Surveiller, probably estimate late 60s, 70s. I haven't been able to narrow it down from the label, which is actually true to the original Flaubert patent in that it contains a pinch of powder. It's clearly some kind of spherical nitro powder, but the charge is so small it doesn't even register on my digital scale. But there is something there just to give it a little bit more boost than simply relying on the primer. The bullet measures 5.78mm in diameter. Now, the current 6mm Flaubert slash Bosquette, depends on the labeling, measures about 5.58, 5.94 millimeters. Difference isn't great, but it's enough that you lose all accuracy beyond 10 meters, if that. The balls or the little pointy bullets are simply too small. Too short would be another potential candidate to use in these if you could get it. But again, the bullet diameter there is typically about 5.65, which is again too small. And you're going to be getting a nice bit of gas blowback in your face because the cartridge floats in the chamber. It's interesting to note that the 6mm Flaubert, Bosquette, long, extra long, coexisted, at least for a certain amount of time, with too short, too long, and too long rifle. And probably for quite a long time, but I can imagine that the first time US-style 22 ammo entered the market in France, it probably went something like this.
He's already got one, you see?
The caliber of these rifles, destined purely for target shooting for children, was this 6mm Bosquette. And contrary to what some people say, it was never 22 long rifle. The 22 long rifle cartridges will chamber in these because the chamber is for a slightly bigger cartridge, but I strongly advise against doing that. It's not that the locking system won't hold. This is perfectly good enough. There's plenty of modern rifles that also use a single lug. But you're going to get case ruptures, substantial gas blowback because there's significantly more powder in those than in these. And you're going to have very, very poor accuracy because the projectile is severely undersized and you're going to laminate your bore with lead. There are some legitimate rifles of this kind, and like Gras rifles, that are chambered for 22, but they were not rifles approved for the school training program. They came afterwards just for people who wanted 22 rifles that looked like this. Anyway, that's enough talk. Let's go and do some shooting. Right, here we are at the range. I've got a target set up at 12 meters, which is the regulation distance these would have been shot at by the kids. And we'll go back 25 and 15, just see how it goes. The sights, as I said, they go up to 200, but that's probably optimistic considering the size of these little things. So yeah, let's try out first what it can do at the distance it's supposed to be used. Even at 12 meters, there's a considerable pause between the click here and the splat at the other end there. I'm actually surprised as it's ejecting. The casing is swelling a bit when it fires, and that provides a bit of resistance for the sliding ejector, and it actually draws it out quickly. I thought it would just drag it out and it would flop on the side, so that's quite interesting. Alright, so this is the first 10 round group I've ever shot with this thing, and it's perfectly fine. The sights are fully adjustable, so given time I could probably fiddle with them so that I got a proper group, but it works absolutely fine. The holes are nice and round, so it's obturating fine. There's no gas back in my face, so I think that's perfectly usable for what it was intended for. So let's head back to 25 and see what happens there. Oh, my first dud. All right, that's the target at 25. Still okay. The sights seem to be telling the truth. What's interesting is I tried to do a second card to try and tighten up the group, and then the shots started going absolutely everywhere. So it could be that the wonderful self-cleaning Bosquette bullets are in fact not doing their job, and that the bore is now quite fouled. Unfortunately, I've got no way of cleaning it here on the range. Nevertheless, I'll take it back to 50 meters and see if I can get something on target. All right, here we are at 50, sights set at 50. I've got myself a normal pistol target, so then I can actually see it. And I actually did find a little rod here in the back of the range that fit down there, so I pushed a couple of patches down. There was quite a lot of greasy residue in there, so even though they're not externally lubed, there's still something being deposited down there. Didn't seem to be lead, which was good. So we'll see what we can do. Also, I noticed that the rear sight slide had shifted loose and had gone decidedly left, so that may account for some of the dispersion in the second 25-meter target. Anyway, let's see if we can hit something at 50. Wow, what a delay. Those two are a bit low, so I'll raise the sight a little bit. So here we are, a magnificent 12-shot group for you. It's, well, adequate, let's say. Certainly adequate enough to teach young boys which end of a rifle goes bang. We've probably reached the end of the practical accuracy on these little cartridges, especially on open range here. There's a considerable pause between the click and the impact on target, so anything can happen to that little projectile on the way down, especially on our range out here in the open. Maybe in the school courtyard it would perform a little better. Also, using the ammunition, there's a considerable difference in noise. I don't know if that comes through on the camera, so I assume that also the age of the cartridges are playing a role. There's not quite the same oomph with each shot. So this performed pretty much as I anticipated it would. It's perfectly good enough for teaching unruly schoolboys which end is the dangerous bit and how to roughly point it in the right direction. What's critical to using this is finding the ammunition. If you don't find that, too short is not going to cut it, and you're going to be smearing lead all the way down your bore. The accuracy, I think I could improve, because when I was cleaning this rifle after shooting it, I was peering down bore, and I noticed that there was kind of a significant step in some of the rifling grooves as I looked down. So I soaked the whole bore in Robler Solo for in total 72 hours, and that seemed to dissolve quite a lot of something, and now the rifling is pretty consistent as far as I can see it down bore from both ends. There's not much in the chamber area, but I don't know whether that's intentional or whether that's just use over the years, because once this became scarce, goodness knows what's been fired down it and the damage it's done. But anyway, maybe now that there's significantly more rifling, or even rifling going down the bore, it should tighten groups up a bit. So yeah, I'll take it out again to have a play and see what happens. There is one article in Gazette des Armes that states that there is a Russian brand of 22, I think Vostok I think it's called, which happens to have slightly fatter bullet than the standard, which apparently, according to the article and the targets shown there, work pretty well. So that may be the only alternative solution if you cannot get this ammunition, would be to have some kind of 22 short, which is for some reason outside the normal bullet diameter. So it remains for me just to say thank you very much for your attention and your support, whatever platform you are currently following us on. And I shall see you very soon back here in the workshop or out on the range, although winter is closing in and so are the ranges.